prospects and customers are not to be treated the same. The number one playbook error that I see for most brands happen right off the back is very simple. They take everybody they have, they lump them in and say, are they engaged or are they not engaged? I lump them up, I batch an email together, and I send it out. Well, what happens there is, well, the reality of it is the emails they get sent to prospects and customers, and there's no differentiation between the two, right? But the reality is, what you've got to be thinking about, and I love these little images here, but you've got to be gentle on the customers and aggressive on prospects. That's lesson number one to teach you right now. Gentle on the customers, aggressive on the prospects. And you'll see what I mean by this a little bit more. What I'm talking about is very simple. People who've already pulled out their wallet and spent money with you, you can talk to them a little bit differently. You can have a different tone with them. You can have different languaging with them. A lot of this stuff will be shown here throughout this presentation here today, but you can be gentle with them to have communication where they've already built that trust. You don't have to build hype into them as much as you need to build education and reason behind it, right? Where you look at prospects, and these are people who have not pulled out their wallet, they're costing you money until you convert them. Remember what I just said there. They're costing you money until you convert them. Prospects are both the greatest thing you can have and the worst thing. And prospects to me are people who opt into a pop-up, sign up on a newsletter, opt into a giveaway channel, come through social media, whatever it is, but they've never pulled out a dollar out of their wallet and they've never given you a dollar. Think about that, right? You got to be aggressive with those people because your goal is to either get them to buy or exit your business. Okay. And I know that sounds harsh, but the reality is you want them to come in and you want them to make that first purchase as fast as possible because the goal is to get them there. Right. So at Braxley, what the things that I learned right away is they have very happy customers. That's first and foremost. In fact, I can see that happy customers as an apparel brand with about 30% of their customers repeating ultimately, which tells me that hey, their customers love them. They're going to come back, and considering they're an accessory brand that people are coming back to make that purchase, usually gives me a great indication of the quality of that customer. And they had a lot of prospects. A lot of people had opted into that pop-up, opted into that 10% coupon, opted into the newsletters, opted into all the different things they can opt in except for making that purchase ultimately. And so I saw that. And so immediately I knew that I had to bring in the 20-60-20 rule with MVC. Now, here's the thing. I've talked about MVC before, MVC being your most valuable customers, but it doesn't always mean the same thing for every business. Some businesses come out to a perfect 20-60-20 split. It's not about the split and the understanding of those exact numbers. It's more about understanding how to put people into buckets. All right. So you can split your audience into three groups. In this case, I split them up to three groups. It was very simple. I grew them to prospects, customers, and repeat purchasers. Very simple. It's a smaller brand. I don't need to get crazy with using LTVs, habits, and behaviors, but you can use those like people who buy bundles versus people who don't buy bundles and so forth. I use this principle across everything. So if I were to take the high level principle, which is MVC around prospects, that's my bottom 20%, 60% is my one-time buyer, and 20% is my two-time buyer. Or more, right? And the reason I use that first one is because my low 20% is my money burning area. That's where I need to get them into my 60%, which is to get them to what I call the profitability zone, where you're trying to start hitting some ROI back from them. And at that point, your goal is to get them to your top 20%. But if you think about this, you can actually take this into a second subsection when you're ready to start thinking about this even bigger and say, well, what about my actual customers who've paid? How do I split them up into three different buckets and how do I move them forward? Strategically, audience management comes down to a very simple thought process. It's around taking your audience and bringing them along the journey with you, right? And you're thinking about bringing them along the journey with you. What I'm talking about is very simple. It's around putting them into these buckets and realizing if I'm not moving my customers throughout my buckets of my business and moving that bucket forward, I'm probably not moving and being effective with my customer base, and I'm probably not spending enough time in audience management. This is where it's really important that you're thinking about this and you're driving segmentation to drive a behavioral group. So again, going back to Braxley here, we split them up into three simple segments. I said, well, we got prospect, customers, and repeat buyers. Very simple. And most brands, if you're under probably $10 million, that's probably more than enough splitting and segmentation that you have to do. That little bit of work is going to drive a lot more result behind it. So right away, the next thing I realized is that we had to get their audience management easy, right? Audience management is tough. Audience management can be overwhelming often. And audience management is something simple because normally we're used to setting these batch and blast campaigns where, I'm just selecting a strong part of my audience and saying, oh, well, these are my active engaged. Let's go ahead and just blast them out. Or I might get into my focus segments and drill down and find those exact people. But often we get too focused, too hyper segmented, too locked on this need and idea that I need to attack this small tiny segment, right? There's both ways. Batch and blast is too big and the focus segment gets too small. And really the importance comes down to making sure that you're thinking about how to find that middle ground, which is where that MVC framework comes in, allows you to be more generalistic and allows you to look at it at a big level without jumping in too deep or without going too wide at the same time. So what did I do, right? So with Braxley, the first thing I did was I took some segmentation and I produced a bunch of different segments that I believe that the business needs. And we're going to run through each one of them because it's going to make sense why I produced these for them, right? So first thing I call this the master send. That's the full send. Exclude your recent purchases or customers and flow right now. Notice what I did there. Full send means everybody that you have on your list, excluding your recent purchasers. So that's usually the purchases in the last 7 days or customers that are actively in a flow right now. Why am I doing that? Well, just make it easy for yourself, right? Pretty simple segment to build. Then I'd build a prospect all. This is all your prospects on the list of people who have not purchased, excluding those in flows right now. Same thing. I did a second version of it, right? Prospects active, the same as above, but with a recent active, right? So they've clicked on something, they've been on a website, they've done everything, but they're still excluded from if they're in flows right now. Notice that everybody is excluding when they're still sitting in a flow. Then I've got my customers. These are all my customers. I'm going to throw them all in one bucket and say, these are all my customers, one time or repeat. Again, excluding those are in flow. Then I say, well, what about my active customers? Now, same thing. People who've purchased at least one time, who are excluded from flow now and did not make a recent purchase in the last 7 days, right? So these are my active customers who are not purchasing. And then last but not least, I took my customers VIP. This year, 2 times LTV. For me, 2 times or high LTV. For me, looking at their brand, I said, all right, well, if their average order value is somewhere around $60, $70, let's go ahead and say over $100, they must be a high value customer. So I put them in the VIP bucket and I created all these buckets. Now, the idea behind creating all these buckets is simple. I allowed this to create with Sendlane, for example, everything's dynamic. So what the beautiful part of creating these types of segments for a business is very simple. All those are working all the time at the realest and most live action timing. So if I'm picking that I'm sending an email to my prospect active today and I select prospect active, it's going to ensure that the last second that we send, we've got the most real-time audience selected with the most real-time exclusions selected and making sure that those who are actually in those automation flows, for example, will 100% be excluded. So you're no longer having to make a lot of decisions, right? Simplifying, right? It's not about making this a tough exercise where I'm going in and building these crazy segments every day, thinking about I want these people and that people and these people. It's about creating buckets that are easy to select, buckets that are easy to understand, and audience management is going to allow you to scale ultimately. And that's where this comes into place. These simple segments right here are all most businesses, again, under maybe $10 million are even thinking about. And you shouldn't have to think anymore. Anything else is spending a lot of extra time to probably squeeze pennies out of the business. Instead, you work on the high level of it. If you focus on the 80% of your customer actions, and this is the segmentation that you'll end up driving ultimately. So that's first step first.